Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Closing Bell East Africa. As global leaders continue to convene for this year's COP27 in Egypt, focus is fast shifting towards building capacity for renewable energy. To get a sense of what market watchers are expecting as the forum made its debut on Africa's soil, CNBC Africa spoke to George Aluru, the managing director, Ikoina, Kenya.
From the business perspective, in terms of those of us who are trying to invest in renewable energy in Africa, out of this COP conference, we expect a lot more finance to actually be put on the table. We expect this COP to be more along the lines of implementation and not really still discussing about what sort of interventions are needed. So we expect to see more commitment to projects. We expect also to see a lot of funding also directed to things that enable renewable energy to integrate within our grids.
All right. And let's move the conversation forward now. Africa has, on average, close to 800 million people who are not yet connected to the grid. And of course, the governments are struggling towards fast-tracking rollout of energy across the continent. Perhaps what role can solar play in this conversation?
So solar has a huge role to play. I think most of Africa, sub-Saharan and also above the Sahara, has a very good solar irradiation. So that's a measure of the potential of solar to produce electricity. So we can use solar energy to do both grid and off-grid kind of supply of electricity or services of electricity, so lighting and things like that, charging your phone. So we can use small systems in the more rural areas, and then we can also do bigger scale projects that then connect to the grid. Solar, we are abundantly blessed with solar all over the continent. We of course need to support it for periods during the night when there's no solar. Yeah, but solar has a huge role to play in supplying electricity in the continent.
What is the potential of solar, especially from where you sit? You have operations in Spain and in Africa. What would you say is the gap that we currently have, and how are you able to play in that space?
As I said, there's a huge potential, but now the challenge with the solar potential is the solar itself is intermittent. It's one of those variable renewable energy technologies, and what you would need to do is to invest in grid strengthening activities. This could include battery storage, intensifying or densifying the transmission network, allowing power to move from various areas quite fast, and then also putting in a bit more of base load plans. So we would need maybe support with geothermal, or also a bit of natural gas for the periods that the solar fluctuates. But with battery technology, the prices of battery technology coming down, I think we will see a lot more solar penetration within the grids in Africa.
What is the current state of penetration right now in East Africa, for instance? What are the numbers looking like? And perhaps how big a market is this for players like yourselves who are investing within the continent?
In Kenya itself, today we are talking about 160 megawatt of solar installed on the grid. Of course, there's a potential for much more than that, which could be in the gigawatts. In Uganda, you're also looking at something like 40 to 50 megawatt of solar in smaller plants. And I mean, this is only the solar that is connected to the electricity network. And a bit smaller size in Tanzania. There's some projects also under development in Ethiopia, I think about 100 megawatt, not yet commissioned. Yeah, but the potential for East Africa as a region is in the gigawatts, in the tens of gigawatts. So, but this all depends on us also being able to strengthen our grids, to invest in interconnections that would connect all these countries, that would allow us to kind of soften the effect of any fluctuations that solar would cause on our grid.
Speaking about investing in the grid, talk to us about investments around the small grids. Perhaps, is there any interest in that line, and what are some of the key trends that you're seeing, especially from the markets you operate in?
Yes, there's a trend towards what we call mini grids, which are kind of isolated grids away, sometimes connected to the grid, sometimes not connected to the grid, to the bigger grid. We've seen companies, even in Kenya, investing in such systems, and they're mostly run using solar. So you have let's say a small megawatt size kind of installation of solar with a battery. And this allows you to supply, let's say, a town or a village of about 1,000, 5,000 customers. And this is really a trend that we've seen is really working well. We also, of course, have seen a lot of on-the-grid kind of solar installations, but those are more your traditional plants. Then Kenya itself is really, and Kenya and East Africa in general, actually, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, we've seen such a huge penetration of what we call pay-as-you-go solar. So these are the small solar systems that allow the more or less low-income members of the society to access services such as lighting and phone charging. This is a trend that Kenya has pioneered, and of course, with the support of the mobile payment infrastructure in Kenya, you are able to pay in really small amounts, less than $1 a day. And you can have this system that gives you light instead of using your normal kerosene lamps.
Interesting. And George, both you and I agree that investment in solar is not cheap. It comes with the territory. It looks at huge capital investment. And how cheap is cheap? How can we move this forward, especially in deepening penetration, where households are looking to diversify? And at the same time, the taxation, of course, the business environments may not necessarily be conducive for us to have mass solar uptake across many pockets of East Africa.
I mean, just two things. We have to look at it from the point of view of having a rather slightly, or let me just say, capital-intensive kind of investment in solar versus not having that electricity. So there's that cost of not having electricity, which is way higher than the cost of having any form of electricity. And then in terms of making solar cheap itself, there has to be these mechanisms, and depends with the size. If it's a domestic system, like a small home system, then there it's how you finance that purchase of that equipment. And again, as I said, the pay-as-you-go model allows people to pay something like 100 Kenyan shillings a day. And if you pay that consistently over a certain period of time, then you come and own the system. But when we come to the grid, then it's all about how we procure such projects. And the most efficient way to do this, as we've seen from the South Africans, is through a regular auction process. So there has to be contracting through auctions. The South Africans have something they call the Renewable Energy Independent Producer Program, which is basically a round of various auctions where you as a solar project developer would come and compete with your fellow solar developers, and the grid then gets the most price efficient kind of being installed fast. And then you do get your chance to, if you don't win in the auction, you get your chance to do the same kind of bidding in the next set of auctions. And this kind of also gives investors that confidence that there's a clear process, there's integrity in the process, there's transparency, there's an assurance that there'll be another round. So then you're able to plan and then also reduce the risk, which also reduces the cost of the technology that you intend to supply to a certain country, and in this case, solar.
Well, that is George Aluru, the Managing Director for Ecoina Kenya. Let's now shift